in that time, and then comes back in verse 24 to the current time that he was writing. So, the historian that wrote this, whoever it was, Ezra, whoever, he had all this before him. He had all this history behind him. So commentators say that this was a very common way for Jewish writers at that time to write. I mean, they would pause on a point. I mean, it would be helpful if we had some lines drawn around it, right, as a parenthesis or something, but we don't. So, but it's just perfectly logical once you begin to think about it. And so, for the moment here, rather than go into all that with the parenthesis, let's consider these first 5 verses and the final verse 24, which is as a unit within itself, and then we'll come back, time permitting, and talk about the other part of it. Who were these? Speaks of these people now as the enemies of the Jews that tried to hinder them. Who were these people? Samaritans, and they allude to how they got there, right? They mentioned Esarhaddon, but there was a whole sequence of kings. There was, I guess, Shalmaneser and Sennacherib. I think Sennacherib was the father of Esarhaddon. And so they brought people in during those times. And if you look in Second Kings 17, and the author here of this workbook summarizes some of this, but the wild animals and so on, once they took all the Jews, or most all of them, out of the country, it was just going back to the wild. We all know, many of us have lived long enough to see abandoned properties, and it doesn't have to take too long, does it? For a place to start growing up and so on, and wild animals to spread and so on. And so that was happening, and so they repopulated it. And as is indicated here in this passage, I guess he summarizes it in 27 here, I think, on your workbook a little bit about some of the things. the kind of inset at the top of page 27. They feared the Lord, these people that were brought in there, yet served their own gods according to the rituals of the nations from among whom they were carried away to this day. And that was the day of course, of the writing of 2 Kings. To this day, they continue practicing the former rituals. They do not fear God, nor do they allow their statutes or their ordinances or the law and commandments which the Lord had commanded the children of Jacob, and so on. And in cites, of course, that you shall not fear other gods, and so on. But they were doing that. And a big, lesson, of course, for us in all this. And it's interesting, the leadership here. And I guess this is frequent throughout the Old Testament times. It mentions, who was the leadership here? It was they had the governor. Really, there's a big two here, so to speak. They had the governor and the high priest, Jeshua or Joshua, variously translated, the high priest, and the heads of the fathers' households. So they were involved, and so it was. But noteworthy is they were 100% agreed, were they not? And that's an important thing within itself. They didn't equivocate. They didn't say, we got to have a little powwow over here, and maybe we could accommodate you somehow. It'd be nice to have additional hands working, and so on and so on. I mean, you could sell yourself on this pretty easily if you're not careful. But no, they knew ahead of time that they were not going to have any involvement from these people of the land. I mean, really and truly, the involvement with the people of the land is what got them into the, you might say, mess that they were in the first place, right? They were taken away into captivity because, they became just like the people of the land, intermarried and all of that. So there was unity, verse 8, there's unity in the leadership. You have nothing in common. We will build for the Lord God of Israel. We will do it. And interestingly, they cited the king. They said, we've got to do what he said. And of course, they loved it, right, that they've got this decree from him, but we got to do it because the king says we got to do it. Well, you can't beat that, right? He gives you the authority to do it, and so you do it. If you just a few comments about this idea of cooperation. You can cooperate if you make to some extent, I guess, with people. You got that. That's a lesson that seemingly our government in Washington hasn't learned these days. Their mother didn't teach them to play nice, right, with others. But on the other hand, you cannot compromise. From a religious standpoint, there are things we cannot compromise. So you can have you mustn't cooperate to the extent of compromise. And what's the difference between union and unity? Is there a difference between those things? You can have unity means really agreement, full agreement, doesn't it? You can have union in a way just simply by being together. I mean, you can put two different kinds of animals in a harness together, and I guess you could call that union. But if they're not the same type of animals, that would not be union, so to speak. So we got to have unity. And that's what we really have to have. I think the late Dr. Warren Wiersbe reminded us, those reading, that we must have, in our time, we must have separation as a people, but not isolation. Jesus didn't expect us to go into a convent, did he? Or a monastery. He didn't expect that of us. We got to be rubbing elbows with people of the world. And we have to accommodate it ourselves. We have to stay faithful while we're doing it. And we have to take advantage, of the opportunity to teach other people that we're in association with. I mean, otherwise we'd just be a little cluster of people in the mountainside or something, really doing nothing for the Lord. Big lessons for for all of us. And these people, though, they weren't going to take no for an answer happily here. So they discouraged them. They made them afraid, really, and they bribed. That's a good old common approach, isn't it? It's right down to today, you betcha. I mean, that's, money convinces people to do things. And so if they had some leadership that was subject to bribe, well, so be it, and that they would help them to achieve what they wanted to. So the people were afraid. They were disheartened. They came in here just thrilled to death about, no doubt, about where they were with all this, and were gung-ho, so to speak, about building the temple. And now then, here come these folks that are giving them a really bad time. We're told here that this goes on until the second year of the reign of Darius. It reminds me, well, there's always something, of course, that can hinder people. We all have people who discourage us, or situations in our lives that are discouraging. And so the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 16, this is perhaps a related thought in a way during his time. He says, "But I will remain in Ephesus until Pentecost." This is 1 Corinthians 16 and 8. "I will remain in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door for effective service has opened to me, and there are many adversaries." You could translate that across time, couldn't you? There are always many adversaries, and there frequently are open doors. Sometimes we know the Holy Spirit closed the door occasionally, but there are frequently, when there are opportunity, there are going to be adversaries, and this continued until the second year of Darius I. Now, there's a backstory here. If you will, turn to the little book of Haggai, which, if you don't know where it is, I hadn't thought about it lately. It's just 2 books back from the end of the Old Testament, 2 books back or something from Matthew. So let's look at the first chapter. There are just 2 chapters there. We're just going to look at the first one. But this is contemporary. This was written, apparently, in the 2nd year of Darius. And it pertains 100% to what we've just been looking at here in the in the book of Ezra. Chuck, when you get there, if you would read I guess it's all of it, but it's the 15 verses of the chapter 1 of Haggai. Have you all found it? Got it? Okay. And for those of you that are listening remotely, if you would just find a little book, and we're going to look at this. We really need to consider it all. Okay.
The 2nd year of King Darius, in the 6th month, on the 1st day of the month, the word of the Lord came by Haggai, the prophet of Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, saying, Thus speaks the Lord of hosts, saying, This people said, The time is not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built. But the word of the Lord came by Haggai, the prophet, saying, Is it time for you yourself to dwell in your cattle houses, and this temple to lie in ruins? Now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. You have sworn much and great and little. You eat, but do not have enough. You drink, but you are not filled with drink. You clothe yourself, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages, put into a bag of gold. Thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Go up to the mountains, break wood, and build a temple, that I may take pleasure in it, and be glorified, says the Lord. You look too much, you look for much, but indeed you came to little. And when you brought it home, I blew it away. Why, says the Lord of hosts? Because of my house that is in ruins, while every one of you runs to his own house. Therefore the heavens above you will hold the dew, and the earth will hold its fruit. For I call for a drought on the land and the mountains, on the grain and the new wine and the oil, on whatever the ground brings forth, on men and livestock, and on all the labor of your hands. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, with all the remnant of the people, obeyed the voice of the Lord their God, and the words of Haggai the prophet. And as the Lord their God had sent him, and the people feared the presence of the Lord, then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, spoke the Lord's message to the people, saying, I am with you, says the Lord. So the Lord stirred the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people. And they came and worked on the house of the Lord of hosts their God, on the 24th day of the 6th month, the 2nd year of King Darius.
Right. Thank you, sir. Now, so in the account that we saw here in chapter 4 of Ezra, we're just not told, you might say, the rest of the story here. There's more going on in the background. We knew the people were afraid, but being afraid and concerned and so on discouraged them apparently to the extent that they just moved on, right? In a sense, they just started doing their own thing, focusing on their own lives, their own homes, and so on. But God is telling them here, you've got to get back with it here. I mean, I guess the people didn't get out the big picture to understand if the King Cyrus had done this for them, that it surely was at the behest of God in heaven. and that he would see them through to doing it, but it just took a big-time nudge here through a prophet. The prophet Zechariah also, and his is more veiled and figurative and so on. This is so straightforward, there's no mistaking any part of what Haggai had to say. And the second, there's more obviously in the second chapter, but this one really tells what was going on here. And so it took this major nudge from God through the prophet Haggai to the leadership here to say, you, the people, get busy and get back with it and build this temple of God. And obviously they did, because then they got it done. Thoughts on that? Comments? There's a whole lot going on here. But anyway, it's kind of a checkered history here, in a sense. But they finally got the job done with the. It's interesting to me how God through the ages used the prophets, it's easy to overlook the minor prophets, and we call them that. Maybe that's an improper sort of insulting designation. But we refer to them as the minor prophets in contrast, really, to what we call the major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so on, Ezekiel. But they had a major role at times, as we see is true here for Haggai, and he got them back on track and got them going again. Well, let's go back now to the to chapter 4. And look at this long parenthesis briefly that fits in, but beginning in verse 6 and ends in verse 23. Now and this again, this is this little side trip here about other. Our lesson here, is referred to as opposition, and this is in the context of opposition. In the time of Cyrus, this is opposition in the time of other kings that the writer's talking about here. Now, in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. And in the days of Artaxerxes, this is the next king, Bislam, Mithridath, Tabeel, and the rest of the colleagues wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And the text of the letter was written in Aramaic and translated from Aramaic. And here it is. They are discussed. Rehum, the commander, and Shimshai the scribe, who would be obviously be the regents, the governor, an assistant, or something of that sort, in the land beyond the Euphrates River. We talked about, to pause on that, but when we were studying the book of Esther during the time of Ahasuerus, we talked about all this vast geographic country and all the difficulties at that time of communicating with all of them. I mean, it just went on and on and on. Vast geographic areas from all the way from, Egypt basically north to Syria and so on, and to get messages out when an edict was done took a long time with fast horses, that we studied about then, that they had bred for the very purpose and so on, and of course now we have we can text and email and everything else, and we don't need the fast horses these days, but we got all these issues. I mean, just again, since I'm paused anyway, Cyrus issued this decree. He lived out the rest of his life and died, and what he decreed to happen didn't happen, right, during his time. Didn't get done completely during his time because nobody, took forever to get the word back to him, presumably that they're not really doing what you said to do, because people are giving them trouble. So the king at the time, Artaxerxes, that we're looking at right now, these are his people over there in that part of the world, and they're trying to look out for him. I mean, to give him credit, you know, from our point of view, this is a people of God, and why are these people hindering them? But from their point of view, this is their country, right? They're the leadership of the country, and they've got a king that they're answering to, and from their point of view, they have to let their king know what's going on. So, I mean, they're not blameworthy, really, because, you know, they really tell the truth here in what they send to him. It speaks about the officials, the secretaries, the men of Erech, the Babylonians, the men of Susa, that is, the Elamites, and the rest of the nations which the great and honorable Osnappar deported and settled in the city of Samaria, and in the rest of the region beyond the Euphrates River. And now this is a copy of the letter which they sent to him. And this Osnappar is not known anywhere else really, although they think it's Ashurbanipal, who was the son of Esarhaddon. That's the best guess. To King Artaxerxes, your servants, the men of the region beyond the Euphrates River, and now let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you have come to us at Jerusalem. They are rebuilding the rebellious and evil city. It certainly was a rebellious city at times. This is their characterization, obviously, in evil. And are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now let it be known to the king that if that city is rebuilt and the walls are finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, tax, or toll. You think that might be true? You know it's true, right? They wouldn't, if all this had happened, they wouldn't be paying tax. It will be detrimental to the revenue of the kings. Now, because we are in the service of the palace, and it is not fitting for us to see the king's shame, for this reason we have sent word and informed the king, so that a search may be conducted in the record books of your fathers, and you will discover in the record books and learn that that city is a rebellious city and detrimental to the kings and provinces, and that they have revolted within it in past days. For this reason that city was laid waste. Excuse me. We are informing the king that if that city is rebuilt and the walls finished, then as a result of this, you will have no possession in the province beyond the Euphrates River. Then the king, this is Artaxerxes, sent a response to Rehum the commander, Shimshai the scribe, and to the rest of their colleagues who live in Samaria, and in the rest of the provinces beyond the Euphrates River, peace. And now, the document which you sent to us has been translated and read before me, and a decree has been issued by me, and a search has been conducted, and it has been discovered that that city has risen up against the kings in the past days, and that rebellion and revolt has been perpetrated in it, that mighty kings have ruled over Jerusalem. That's a true, high compliment. Governing all the provinces beyond the Euphrates River, and that tribute, custom, tax, and toll were paid to them. Now issue a decree to make those men stop work, so that this city will not be rebuilt until a decree is issued by me, and beware of being negligent in carrying out this matter. Why should there be great damage to the detriment of the kings? Then, as soon as the copy of King Artaxerxes' decree was read before Rehum and Shimshai, the scribe, and their colleagues, they went in a hurry to Jerusalem, to the Jews, and stopped them by military force. They hot-footed, so to speak, to take care of this right away, which is, of course, what they wanted to do to begin with. Now, this is where Artaxerxes stood on this at this time, because he really he hadn't found information to the contrary, but he did not stand consistently on this forever, because it was during his time that we see in the next instance we see the scribe coming over from Jerusalem during his days that Ezra came and to help reestablish the law. So obviously that did not stand forever. So that's a lot. But that just tells other hindrances, and then of course the writer goes back to the main line here. Okay, a lot we're trying to get in here. Okay, let's look at the applications here quickly, and we've probably said most of this. On page 32, The Jews' unwillingness to allow their enemies to join their efforts stands as an excellent example to follow. Rather than compromising truth for the sake of union, I mentioned this earlier, we must promote the kind of unity that results only when all parties submit to the will of God. Describing the appropriate path for Christians to take, Paul wrote, "And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them." Secondly, Samaritan opposition to the Jews began when they arrived from Babylon and continued through their rebuilding of both the temple and wall around the city of Jerusalem. The enemies of God's people did everything they could to stop these good projects. And again, that's the good's in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? It was certainly from God's standpoint, from the Jews' standpoint, it was a good project. From the standpoint of the people of the land, it was anything but. It should not surprise us when opposition arises against those who serve God. Paul told Timothy, "Yes, and all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution." This was true of the Jews. It remains true of Christians. Regardless, we must not forget the words of Jesus, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And the author says, when opposition arises, remain faithful. Okay, a couple of points maybe from the discussion questions or whatever here. This is kind of this first discussion question on page 34 is sort of a softball, I guess. Why do you think the adversaries of the Jews asked to help build the temple? Why did the Jews decline their offer? The reason they offered to help was why? And they probably would have wound up interfering, don't you guess, or make sure that they really stopped it. But why did the Jews decline? That's right. It wasn't the right thing to do, was it? It just simply wasn't. They would have been building something that wasn't what God wanted if they had done that. And of course, what we can learn from it is pretty obvious, and that's just stick with what God said. And I mean, it's enticing, and a good, and we can make a case a lot of times for union, so to speak, but we got to be extremely careful with how we go about that. Number two, he says, how do we overcome negative and discouraging comments? There's a whole lot more here than comments, right? I mean, there were threats and so on. The people were afraid. They weren't just discouraged; they were afraid. And of course, if you've got people being made afraid, literally, it's more troublesome, obviously, than just being. If negative comments is what you've got, how should you deal with that? Basically, I mean, ideally you ignore it, right? We got to be stand solid enough in our position about things in life in general. We can't let just negative comments and so on derail us. Just briefly here, number three, what role do you think God played in the reconstruction of this temple? So, yeah. I mean, he was behind it all, right? And really, very evident was his sending Haggai, right? For one thing, just to get them back on track. That's God's, as we might say, fingerprints is all over it. For what can we learn from the accusations that enemies of the Jews made against them? These are all complimentary from the Jews' standpoint, right? They had great kings. They took over all that territory. They made the other countries pay tribute to them. They've been doing the right thing. They're very successful. They were feared in the region. And when they were the people of God in earlier years, they thrived, they prospered, and God saw to it. And, you know, again, he's helping them right now to prosper as they seek to bring the country back to where it should have been all along if they had continued to serve him. Thanks, everybody.